Thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated. The nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air carrying smell also became manifested. Tatra nasikayam vayur devata. The presiding deity with regard to the nose is Vayu. He is known as Gandhavaha. Vayu Gandhavaha. He is the one who carries fragrances. Anena Gandhaha Vishayaha Darshitaha. It's pointed out that fragrance is the sense object. Granaha Indriyam. And the sense of smell is the sense under consideration. The nasal instrument, odor, and the controlling deity of air, smelling, etc., all became manifested simultaneously when the Lord desired to smell. The Vedic mantras confirm the statement in the Upanishad statement that everything is first desired by the Supreme before the subordinate living entity can act upon it. The living entity can see only when the Lord sees. The living entity can smell when the Lord smells, and so on. Shrotrasriya Shrotram Chakshushas Chakshu is the eye of the eye, the ear of the ear. You find it in one of the Upanishads, I think it's Kena Upanishad. The idea is that the living entity cannot do anything independently. He can simply think of doing something independently, but he cannot act independently. This independence in thinking is there by the grace of the Lord, but the thinking can be given shape only by the grace of the Lord, and therefore the common saying is that man proposes and God disposes. The whole explanation is on the subject of absolute dependence of the living entities and absolute independence of the Supreme Lord. Less intelligent persons claiming to be on an equal level with God must first prove themselves to be absolute and independent, and then they must substantiate their claim to be one with God. See, in my current setup, when somebody wants to enter into the Zoom room, normally I would hear a sound, like a bell sound. But in my laptop, for some reason, I'm not able to hear sound. So when somebody wants to be admitted, I have no idea. That too, when I'm reading out something and all that, I have no idea. Unless I looked into my laptop screen at participants column on the right and all that. So please don't become wild with fury when I don't admit you. Simply I don't see. Sometimes I do admit, but then it doesn't come. Like today, Shajullah Prabhu, he had come. I noticed it and I clicked admit, but it didn't admit. I don't know what to do about things like that. Text 21. Yadatmani niralokam atmanam chitidrikshataha nirvinne hyakshinidasya jyotish chakshu gunadkaha. Thus, when everything existed in darkness, the Lord desired to see himself and all that was created. Then the eyes, the illuminating God's Son, the power of vision, and the object of sight all became manifested. Akshini Sthanam. The eyes are the locations for this function of the senses. Jyotiraditya Devata. The sun god is the Devata for this. Chakshurindriyam. Eyes are the senses. Tato gunasya rupasya grahanam, which grasps forms. Anena rupam vishayo darshitaha. So in this way, it is pointed out that sight is the sense object here. The universe is by nature dense darkness, and therefore the total creation is called tamas or darkness. The night is the real feature of the universe, for then one cannot see anything, including oneself. The Lord, out of his causeless mercy, first desired to see himself when all the creation is well, and thus the sun became manifested. The power of vision for all living entities became possible, and the objects of vision were also manifested. This means that the whole phenomenal world, material world, became visible after the creation of the sun. 22. बोध्यमानस्य ऋषिभिरात्मनस्तज्जिघृक्षतः कर्णौ च निरभिद्येतां दिशश्रोत्रं गुणग्रहः. By development of the desire of the great sages to know the ears, the power of hearing, the controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifested. When ignorance time starts at evening, after sunset, by development of the desire of the great sages to know the ears, the power of hearing, the controlling deity of hearing, the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desired to hear about the self, capital S. Rishibir Vedair Bodhyamanasya. The rishis who wanted to learn from the Vedas. Okay, here. Wait. Let me open Karma Sandarbha. What is this? This is 2.10 point something. बोध्यमानता ज्ञानम् अतः सामान्यकारेण सामान्य आकारेण सामान्य आकार सामान्य आकारेण स्फुरं च परापश्यन्ति मध्यमाख्य वेदद्वारा परमात्मनैवेति ज्ञेयम्. Here the manifestation of sound is through Paramatma using the Vedas at three levels of sound: Para, Pashyanti, and Madhyama. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, by advancement of knowledge, one should try to know about the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum of everything. Knowledge does not mean knowledge only of the laws of nature or physical knowledge, which are working by the direction of the Lord. The scientists are eager to hear about the physical laws working in material nature. They're eager to hear through the medium of radio and television about things taking place far away from them on other planets. But they should know that the power of hearing and the instruments for hearing were given to them by the Lord for hearing about the self or about the Lord. Unfortunately, the power of hearing is misused in hearing vibrations of mundane affairs. The great sages were interested in hearing about the Lord through Vedic knowledge and nothing more. That is the beginning of oral reception of knowledge. There are different levels of sound. We have gross sound, which is what we hear in Jagrata Avastha when we are in the wakeful state. And then inside dreams also we hear. What is that sound? That sound is certainly not caused by some gross phenomenon. Like, gross phenomenon means I tap the table and we hear a sound. But in a dream, we hear sounds even though nobody is tapping a gross table. So it's a different type of sound. And then you have sometimes Prabhupada says Maya Devi, she dictates to the living entity. So that dictation also indicates that there is some kind of communication. What is that sound? And then there is entirely, completely spiritual sound. So there are different levels of sound. Para, Pashyanti, Madhyama, and so on. 23. Vastuno mridukathinya, lakhu guruvoshna shitata, jighrikshatastvang nirbhinna, tasyam romam mahiruha, tatra chantar bahirvatas, pachalabdha gunavrita. When there was a desire to perceive the physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, hardness, warmth, coldness, lightness, and heaviness, the background of the touch sensation was generated, namely the skin pores, and the bodily hairs, along with their controlling deities. The trees, within and outside the skin, there is a covering of air through which the touch sensation becomes prominent. Peter Swami refers to third canto for a similar statement about the skin. When we come to that, we'll see that. Krishna Chakravarti Thakur is also talking about his own. Ayam artha. This is the point. Vagendriyameva bahihi kanduti sahitam samsparsham ghanat Roma shabdena uchyate. The sense of uh, touch externally is referred to as uh, Roma. Or Roma is what? Hair. Romavali, hair. Referred to as hair, which accepts touch, itching, and so on. तत्र महीरुहाणां देवतात्वम् अन्तर्बहिष्य स्पर्शं गृह्णाति तदेव त्वक् शब्देन उच्यते तत्र वातः देवता. So for that hair, the trees are the devatas. Antarbahishya sparsham grinat tadeva vak shabde. I want to see how do I do. Antarbahishya sparsham grinat tadeva vak shabdena uchyate. And then there is another um, sense which is referred to as skin, which um, which conveys the touch sensation both from inside and outside. For that, Vata is the Devata. And then he also refers to the same 3.6.18 and 19. What is this 3.6.18? Why they're all quoting this? Let's go ahead and have a look. 3, 1, 6, 1. When there was a separate manifestation of skin, the controlling deities of sensations and their different parts entered into it, and thus the living entities feel itching and happiness due to touch. Vachamasya Nirvinanyasya Charmani Lokapal. What is that? It doesn't even exist here. There's a edition that doesn't exist. Nirvinanyasya Charmani doesn't even exist in this version. Lokapalo Nilovishat. What is this? This is 16. 18 and 16. No answer. 18 and 16. When there was a manifestation of skin separated from the gigantic form, Anila, the deity directing the wind, entered with partial touch, and thus the living entities can realize tactile knowledge. That means the sense of touch, experience of touch. तत्र चर्माणि चर्मोपलक्ष्यतात्वगित्यर्थः प्राणेनांशेन इति प्राणवायुर्व्याप्तेन त्वगिन्द्रियेण इत्यर्थः. And this sense of touch is pervaded by pranavayu. Okay. The physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, are subjects of sense perception, and thus physical knowledge is a subject matter of the touch sensation. One can measure the temperature of matter by touching with the hand, and one can measure the weight of an object by lifting it with the hand, and thus estimate its heaviness or lightness. The skin, the skin pores, and the hairs on the body are all interdependent with the touch sensation. The air blowing within and outside the skin is also an object of sense perception. This sense perception is also a source of knowledge, and therefore it is suggested here that physical or physiological knowledge is subordinate to the knowledge of the self, as above mentioned. Knowledge of the self can expand to the knowledge of phenomena. Phenomena means essential experience. But physical knowledge cannot lead to knowledge of the self. There is, however, an intimate relation between the hairs on the body and the vegetation on the body of the earth. The vegetables are nourishment for the skin, both as food and medicine, as stated in the third canto. Tocham asya vinirvinnam vivishur dhishniyam aushadhihi. This is the same quote. Text 24. Hasto ruru hattustasya nanakarma chikirshaya tayostu balavan indra adanam uhayashrayam. Thereafter, when the Supreme Person desired to perform varieties of work, the two hands and their controlling strength, and Indra, the demigod in heaven, became manifested, as also the acts dependent on both the hands and the demigod. Balam Indriyam. Here the sense is the sense of strength. Indro Devata. Indra is the Devata. The Dubhayashrayam Adhanam Karma. And the activity is uh, lifting and so on. Moving things about with the hand. Adanam adiyamanam vastu vishaya. To give things, take things, these kind of activities. In every item, we can note with profit that the sense organs of the living entity are never independent at any stage. The Lord is known as the Lord of the senses, Rishikesha. Gods are the servants of the Supreme Lord. That is the arrangement in the system of creation. The whole thing is controlled ultimately by the Supreme Lord. And there is no independence of either the material nature or the living entity. The illusioned living entity claims to be the Lord of his senses. Who claims to be the Lord of his senses is under the clutches of the external energy of the Lord. As long as the living entity continues to be puffed up by his tiny existence, he is to be understood to be under the stringent control of the external energy of the Lord, and there is no question of liberation from the clutches of illusion, Maya, however much one may declare himself a liberated soul. 25. Gatim jigi shatah pado turuhate bhikamikam padbhyam yagya swayam havyam karmabhi kriyate nribhi. Thereupon, because of his desiring to control movement, his legs became manifested, and from the legs, the controlling deity named Vishnu was generated. By his personal supervision of this act, all varieties of human beings are busily engaged in dutiful occupational sacrifices. Vishnu Reva Swayam to the Shatru Vishnu himself became the presiding deity. This is Vishnu with the name Yagya, Lord Yagya. For the feet, Karma Shaktirindriyamuktam, Gatyakhya Karma Shaktirindriyamuktam. Here is a discussion of the sense of activity, uh, activity of motion, moving activity. नृभिरिति व्यष्टिजीवेषु अपि इयमेव रीतिरिति दर्शयन् अधिकारी अधिकारी not it's actually nara naraधिकारत्वं यज्ञादीनां इति यज्ञादीनां दर्शयति. Here notice this expression nirvih by different human beings. So Sridhar Swami notes that this is a reference actually to all the collective living entities in material existence. This is the style of expression. It is just pointed out that human beings are the ones who are eligible to engage in yajna and other such ritualistic activities. Jiva Goswami, यज्ञो विष्णु शक्ति आविष्ट रूपा काचित देवता स्वयं इति तथापि सर्वतः प्राधान्य विवक्षया. Here Yagya, Jiva Goswami mentions, even though it is said Vishnu himself, it simply means that some devata who is greatly empowered by Lord Vishnu's potency, he is in charge of this sense of movement. निर्भरति व्यष्टिजीवेषु इयमेव रीतिः सर्वत्र तथा सर्वैव विषयाः शास्त्रविहिता एव ग्राह्या इति बोधितम्. All the topics of the scriptures and all the prescriptions of the scriptures are meant to be accepted by by human beings, even though nirbhihi, by the different human beings, is a reference to all the demigods and so on. Achyutanam Prabhu should be admitted. Every human being is engaged in his particular occupational duty, and such activities are visible as men go hither and thither. This is very prominently visible in big cities of the world. People are going all over the cities with great concern from one place to another. This movement is not limited only to the cities, but it's also visible outside the cities from one place to another, or from one city to another by different vehicles. Men are moving by cars and trains on the surface, by subways within the earth, and by planes in the sky for the purpose of business success. In all these movements, the real purpose is to earn wealth for comfortable life. Arthakama. For this comfortable life, the scientist is engaged, the artist is engaged, the engineer is engaged, the technician is engaged, all in different branches of human activity. But they do not know how to make the activities purposeful to fulfill the mission of human life because they do not know the secret. All their activities are targeted towards the goal of self gratification without control. That means unrestricted self gratification. Therefore, by all this business, they are unknowingly entering into the deep regions of darkness. Because they have been captivated by the external energy of the Supreme Lord, they have completely forgotten the Supreme Lord Vishnu. And thus, they have taken it for granted that this life, as presently manifested under the conditions of material nature, is all in all for enjoying the highest amount of sense gratification. But such a wrong conception of life cannot give anyone the desired peace of mind. And thus, in spite of all advancement in knowledge by use of the resources of nature, no one is happy in this material civilization. The secret is that at every step, they should try to execute sacrifices toward the path of world peace. The Bhagavad Gita 18.45 to 46 also advises the same secret in the following verses. Sve sve karma, sve sve karma yabhirata, samsiddhim lavate nara. स्वकर्म निरत सिद्धिम यथा विन्दति तच्छृणु यत प्रवृत्तिर्भूतानां येन सर्वमिदं ततं स्वकर्मणा तमभ्यर्च्य सिद्धिं विन्दति मानवः. The Lord said to Arjuna, just hear from me how one can attain the highest perfection in life simply by discharging a specified occupational duty. Man can attain the highest perfection of life by worshipping the Supreme Lord and by performing sacrifice for the sake of the Supreme Lord Vishnu, who is all pervading and by whose control every living being acquires his desired facilities according to his personal propensity. There's no harm in having different propensities in life because every human being is proportionately independent to chalk out the plan of his life by different occupations. But one should make it a point in his life to know perfectly well that he is not independent absolutely. One is certainly under the control of the Supreme Lord and under different agencies. Knowing this, one should make it a point that by his work and the result of his labor, he serves the Supreme Lord as prescribed by the authorities expert in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. For performing such occupational duties of life, the leg is the most important instrument of the body because without the help of the legs, one cannot move from one place to another. And therefore, the Lord has special control over the legs of all human beings, which are meant for performing yagyas. Yagyas involve movement. You need to walk here and there. You cannot just be sitting in one place. 26. Something in the chat box here. Why we perform Sandhyarati during that time? Which time? Sandhyarati at evening.
After sunset, I mean, he's asking you. There came a section where it was after sunset, this time of ignorance, something.
What we perform Sandhyarati is meant to be performed at the time of Sandhya. It's meant to be performed at Sandhya at that time. Apart from that, Arati Kirtana is meant to happen continuously because it is a Nitya Karma. It is a compulsory duty. Arati Kirtan happens throughout the day. From early morning, when the deity wakes up to night time, when the deity goes to rest. Throughout, there's supposed to be Arati Kirtan. That too, Kirtan is supposed to be done throughout. Even though Arati in the afternoon, there's a break. But Kirtan, it's not like that. Kirtan is supposed to happen all the time. In Mayapur, Prabhupada wanted Kirtan to happen 24 hours a day. 26. Nirabhidyata Shishno Vai Prajanandamritarthinah Upasthasit Kamanam Priyam Tad Dubhayashrayam. Whereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. Sexual pleasure and its controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Raja Apatyam, Anando Pratyat, Amritam Swargali, Tadarthinaha. So those who aspire to taste, those who aspire to relish having children, sexual pleasure, attaining the heavenly planets and so on, for them, uh, you have this arrangement. Shishnodishtana upasthamindriyam prajapadishchasi vidyegam. Tadopayashram kamanam sammadhipriyam sukham. तत्र आनन्दशब्देन तद् हेतवः स्त्रिय एव उच्यन्ते. Srila Jiva Goswami notes that the word Ananda refers to woman. तत्र च स्त्रीणां विषयत्वं साक्षात्त्वेन भोग्यत्वात् अन्ययोस्तु तद् उत्पाद्यतया भोगहेतुत्वात्. Women are the Vishaya, the object of enjoyment here. Swargadikam च गार्हस्य धर्ममय प्रजा स्त्री परिग्रहात् उत्पाद्यं भवति. Swarga and so on is generated when one has offspring and a wife who participate in the duties of household life. So, 3. The heavenly pleasure for the conditioned soul is sexual pleasure, and this pleasure is tasted by the genitals. The woman is the object of sexual pleasure, and both the sense perception of sexual pleasure and the woman are controlled by the Prajapati, who is under the control of the Lord's genitals. The impulseless must know from this verse that the Lord is not impersonal, for he has his genitals, on which all the pleasurable objects of sex depend. No one would have taken the trouble to maintain children if there were no taste of heavenly nectar by means of sexual intercourse. This material world is created to give the conditioned souls a chance for rejuvenation, for going back home, back to God. And therefore, generation of the living being is necessary for upkeep of the purpose of creation. Sexual pleasure is an impetus for such action, and as such, one can even serve the Lord in the act of such sexual pleasure. The service is counted when the children born of such sexual pleasure are properly trained in God consciousness. The whole idea of material creation is to revive the dormant God consciousness of the living entity. In forms of life other than the human form, sexual pleasure is prominent without any motive of service for the mission of the Lord. But in the human form of life, the conditioned soul can render service to the Lord by creating progeny suitable for the attainment of salvation. One can beget hundreds of children and enjoy the celestial pleasure of sexual intercourse, provided he is able to train the children in God consciousness. Otherwise, begetting children is on the level of the swine. Rather, the swine is more expert than the human being because the swine can beget a dozen piglets at a time, whereas the human being can give birth to only one at a time. So one should always remember that the genitals, sexual pleasure, the woman and the offspring are all related in the service of the Lord. And one who forgets this relationship in the service of the Supreme Lord becomes subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence by the laws of nature. Perception of sexual pleasure is there even in the body of the dog, but there is no sense of God consciousness. The human form of life is distinct from that of the dog by the perception of God consciousness. Okay, 27. Utsrikshodhatumalam nirabhidyata vaigudam tatah payustato mitra utsarga ubhayashrayah. Thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, anus, and the sensory organ thereof developed along with the controlling deity Mitra. The sensory organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity. धातुमलं भुक्त अन्नादीनाम् असारांशं त्यक्तुमिच्छो बुधपाय मित्रोत्सर्गा अधिष्ठान इंद्रिय देवता विषय. Budam adhishtanam, the anus, that is the location. Payu, the evacuating sense organ, is the sense. Mitro devata, mitra is the devata. Utsarga vishaya. Evacuation is the object of sense. Even in the matter of evacuating stool, the refuse is controlled. So how can the living entity claim to be independent? 28. Asisrip so purah purya nabhidvaram apanatah tatrapanas tato mrityu prithakvam ubhayashrayam. Thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure and death were combinedly created. The navel is a shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. Purya, deha, puraha, dehantrani, asisripso, sarvato gantamicho, nabhidvaram nirabhadyate amsham. There's some kind of departing, some method of leaving the body through the navel. When prana and apana are disconnected from the nabhi, from the navel, then that is well known as mrityu, death. Nabhidvaram adhishtanam, apana indriyam, mrityu devata, prithaktuam maranam vishaya. So the gateway to the navel, that is the adhisthana, that is the location. Apana is the sense. Mrityu is the devata. And death, the experience of death, that is the object of experience. The pranavayu continues a life and the apanavayu stops the living force. Both the vibrations are generated from the abdominal hole, the navel. The navel is a joint from one body to the other. Lord Brahma was born of the abdominal hole of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu as a separate body, and the same principle is followed even in the birth of an ordinary body. The body of the child develops from the body of the mother, and when the child is separated from the body of the mother, it's separated by cutting the navel joint. And that is the way the Supreme Lord manifested himself as separated many. The living entities are therefore separated parts, and thus they have no independence. 29. Aditso rannapananam asan kukshyantranadayah nadya samudrashatayo stushti pushtis tadashraye. When there was a desire to have food and drink, the abdomen and the intestines and also the arteries became manifested. The rivers and seas are the source of their sustenance and metabolism. तयोः नाड्यन्तरवर्गयोः क्रमेण नद्यः समुद्राश्च देवते. The presiding deity for Nadi arteries is are the presiding deities of the rivers. The rivers are presiding deities for the arteries. River means presiding deity of river. For the intestines, the presiding deities are the presiding deities of the oceans, Samudraha. Tushtir Udaravaranam. Tushti or sustenance refers to filling the stomach. Pushtistu rasa parinamata sthaulyam. And pushti, referred to here as metabolism, refers to I don't want to say becoming fat, but uh, development of the body through various actions of the enzymes and so on. The controlling deities of the intestines are the rivers and those of the arteries, the seas. Filling the belly with food and drink is the cause of sustenance, and metabolizing the food and drink replenishes the body's energies. Therefore, the body's health is dependent on healthy actions of the intestines and the arteries. The rivers and the seas, being the controlling deities of the two, keep the intestines and the arteries in healthy order. So when we pollute all these rivers with all kinds of chemicals and all, we are actually harming our own internal biological system. Similarly, when we harm the ocean by dumping non biodegradable substances and all that, then we are creating further problems for ourselves also. 30. निदिध्यासोरात्ममायां हृदयं निरभिद्यत ततो मनश्चंद्र इति संकल्प काम एव च. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the mood, determination, and all desire became manifested. Nidithyaso, being desirous to know, refers to being desirous to know very deeply. Kamaha abhilashaha. Kama here refers to an abhilasha, hankering. Hridaya manas chandra sankalpa adhishthana. And then you have the heart, the mind, the moon, determination, and so on. Even before the mind was generated, there was a desire, but that was the previous state of the mind. Based on that, there was desire before. Atmanaha mayam, mayikam ch vastu, nididhyaso, chintayetu micho. When he desired to think about the entity which comes about because of Maya, then the mind needed to be uh, manifested and so on. Hridayam adhishtanam, the heart is a location. Manaha indriyam, the mind is the internal sense. Chandraha devata, the moon is the presiding deity for it. Sankalpa, abhilasha, adhyaha, vishayaha. And the objects of experience are determination, anchoring, and so on. Atra hridaya eva adhisthane, in this location of the heart, chin, why is it chinta? It should be chitta. It should be chitta. Chitta. Chinta. Chitta Ahankara Buddhaya Indriyani. Chitta, which is uh, Prabhupada translates it as contaminated consciousness. There is something called Chitta. There's Chitta, there is Manas, there is Buddhi, there is Ahankara. So Chitta, Ahankara, Buddhaya, Indriyani. Here, the Chitta, the Ahankara, and Buddhi, these are the these are the senses. Tad Devatascha and the uh, presiding deity for them are Vasudeva, Rudra, and Brahma, respectively. Devataha Tritiya Skandha Jaya. And these presiding deities are to be known from the third canto. So in that way, there are 18 senses, out of which 11 are well known. Prabhu.
Prabhu, in 20th verse, when there was point of, in 21st verse, when Lord desired to see himself and all that was created. So all that was created means everything was manifested at that time, or it was visible at that time?
No. Everything is being produced in sequence. But in order to see what is being produced, you need to have a separate arrangement. So therefore, at the time, he wanted that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The heart of every living entity is the seat of the super soul, Paramatma, a plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. The living entities who are conditioned in the material world are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them. And the requisite material body is offered to each and every one of them by the material energy under the direction of the super soul. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 9.10. When therefore the super soul is situated in the heart of the conditioned soul, the requisite mind is manifested in the conditioned soul and he becomes conscious of his occupation as one is conscious of his duty after waking up from slumber. Therefore, the material mind of the living entity develops when the super soul sits on his heart, after which the mind, the controlling deity, moon, and then the activities of the mind, namely thinking, feeling, and willing, all take place. The activities of the mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart, and the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. 31. Tvak charma mamsa rudhiram medo majjasti dhatavah bhumyap tejo maya sapta prano vyomambu vayubhihi. The seven elements of the body, namely the thin layer on the skin itself, the flesh, blood, fat, marrow, and bone are all made of earth, water, and fire, whereas the life breath is produced by the sky, water, and air. तदेवम् अधिदैवादि भेदं विभज्य उक्त्वा तदंशभूतानां धात्वादीनां स्वरूपमाह. So having separately described the distinctions of Adidaiva and so on, now he talks about the nature of the elements and so on, which are uh, parts of all of that is being manifested by the Supreme Lord. Tvak sthulam charma taduparistitam sukshma. Tvak refers to the physical skin. Charma is subtle skin that is on top of it. The construction of the whole material world is prominently made by three elements, namely earth, water, and fire. But the life force is produced by sky, air, and water. So water is a common element in both the gross and subtle forms of all material creation. And it should be noted here that due to necessity, water being the most prominent in the material creation is the principal element of all the five. This material body is thus an embodiment of the five elements, and the gross manifestation is perceived because of three, namely earth, water, and fire. Sensations of touch are perceived due to the thin layer on the skin. And bone is as good as hard stone. Okay, there's another meaning of this Sthaulya Sukshma or Sthula Sukshma. Sthula can mean thick and Sukshma can mean thin. So it looks like there is a hard layer of skin, and above that there is a thin layer of skin. The hard layer of skin is referred to as tvak, and the thin layer of skin is referred to as charma. The breathing air of life is produced of sky, air, and water, and therefore open air, regular bath, and ample space in which to live are favorable for healthy vitality. Fresh produce from the earth, like grains and vegetables, as well as fresh water and heat, is good for the upkeep of the gross body. 32. Gunatmakani indriyani bhutadi prabhava guna manah sarva vikaratma buddhir vijnana rupini. The sense organs are attached to the modes of material nature, and the modes of material nature are products of the false ego. The mind is subjected to all kinds of material experiences, happiness and distress, and the intelligence is the feature of the mind's deliberation. Tamaseshu eva, okay. Mana eva sarva vikaranam atma swarupam. The mind is, it has a very essential nature of all kinds of transformations. तामसेषु एव विषयेषु संकल्प विकल्प मात्रं करोति न तु हेय उपादेय विवेकम्. See, the mind also discriminates and intelligence also discriminates, but the mind, it simply accepts and rejects amongst tamasic sense objects. It does not discriminate between that which is meant to be given up and that which is meant to be accepted. Buddhistu tathabhutartha vijnana rupini natu paramartha grahini iti vairagyartham uktam. But intelligence, it has that, it is endowed with that concept of realizing what is not to be accepted and what is to be accepted. What objects are meant to be accepted, what objects are not meant to be accepted. It is not actually designed to grasp spiritual reality. This has been stated in order to induce renunciation and detachment. Aneneva buddhi manaso swarupam chokta. That way the natures of buddhi and manas, intelligence and mind, have been brought out. This is a side discussion containing the definition of various senses. Illusion by the material nature, the living entity identifies with false ego more clearly when the living entity is entrapped by the material body. He at once identifies with the bodily relationships, forgetting his own identity as spirit soul. This false ego associates with different modes of material nature, and thus the senses become attached to the modes of material nature. Mind is an instrument for feeling different material experiences, but intelligence is deliberative and can change everything for the better. The intelligent person, therefore, can attain salvation from the illusion of material existence by proper use of intelligence. An intelligent person can detect the awkward position of material existence and thus begin to inquire as to what he is. why he is subjected to different kinds of miseries, and how to get rid of all miseries. And thus, by good association, an advanced, intelligent person can turn towards the better life of self realization. So, see, this requires good association. But without good association, intelligence will not be able to help one understand transcendental reality. It is advised, therefore, that an intelligent person associate with the great sages and saints who are on the path of salvation. By such association, one can receive instructions which are able to slacken the conditioned soul's attachment for matter, and thus the intelligent man gradually gets rid of the illusion of matter and false ego and is promoted to the real life of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. 33. एतद् भगवतो रूपं स्थूलं ते व्याहृतं मया मह्यादिभिश्चावरणैर् अष्टभिर्बहिरावृतम्. Thus, by all this, the external feature of the personality of God, it is covered by gross forms such as those of planets, which were explained to you by me. स्थूलं भगवतो रूपं ब्रह्मदेह उदाहृतः तन्तत्वाच्च सूक्ष्मञ्च शङ्खचक्रगदाधरम्. Because the Supreme Lord controls the body of Brahma is the gross material form of the Supreme, is described as the gross material body of the Supreme Lord, Supreme Personality of Godhead. His own form, holding Shankha Chakra, Gada, that is of a finer nature. Upasamharati etaditi. This is a summary. Sthulam samashti sankhya. Here the word sthula or gross refers to all the collective planets inside the universe, all the different varieties inside the universe. Mahyadiviriti mahasamashti sankhya mahastula. And then you have the super collective, or all the universes put together with all their different planets, elements, everything. That is Mahastula. That is grandly gross. As explained in the Bhagavad Gita 7.4, the separated material energy of the personality of Godhead is covered by 8 kinds of material coverings: earth, water, fire, air, sky, mind, intelligence, and false ego. All these are emanations from the personality of Godhead as his external energy. These coverings are just like the coverings of clouds for the sun. The cloud is a creation of the sun, yet it actually covers the eyes so that one cannot see the sun. The sun cannot be covered by the clouds. The cloud can at most extend a few hundred miles, extend a few hundreds of miles in the sky, but the sun is far greater than millions of miles. So a 100-mile covering is not competent to cover millions of miles. Therefore, one of the various energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot, of course, cover the Lord. But these coverings are created by him to cover the eyes of the conditioned souls who want to lord it over the material nature. Actually, the conditioned souls are covered by the illusory creative cloud of matter. And the Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to their eyes because they have no eyes of transcendental vision. And because they cannot see the personality of God, they therefore deny the existence of the Lord and the transcendental form of the Lord. The covering of the gigantic material feature is accepted by such men with a poor fund of knowledge, and how this is so is explained in the following verse. 34. Atah param sukshmatamam avyaktam irvisheshanam anati madhya nidhanam nityam vang manasah param. Therefore, beyond this gross manifestation is a transcendental manifestation, finer than the finest form. It has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. And therefore, it is beyond the limits of expression or mental speculation and is distinct from the material conception. Sthulamuptva sukshmam samashtilinga shariramaha. This is a description of the collective subtle bodies, which is subtle. अतः परमस्य कारणभूतं सूक्ष्ममतीन्द्रियम्. This subtle reality is beyond the range of the gross senses. Sukshmatamam. What is this word? Sukshmatamam, finer than the finest. Literally, Sukshmatamam means most fine or most subtle. Iti anenaiva sukshmam atisukshmam cheti dvitiyam labhyate. From this, we understand that there is something called subtle and there's something called very subtle. Patra linga shariram atisukshmam. Maya rupam nirvisheshanam ityadibhis chaturvih visheshanaiva uktam. So the linga sharira, the subtle body, is very subtle, and it is a form created by Maya, and it has all these features. The gross external body of the Supreme is manifested at certain intervals, and thus the external feature or form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not the eternal form of the Lord, which has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Anything which has a beginning, interim, and end is called material. The material world is begun from the Lord, and thus the form of the Lord, before the beginning of the material world, is certainly transcendental to the finest or the finer material conception. The ether in the material world is considered to be the finest. Finer than the ether are mind, intelligence, and false ego. But all 8 of the outward coverings are explained as outer coverings of the absolute truth. The absolute truth is therefore beyond the expression and speculation of the material creation. He is certainly transcendental to all material conceptions. This is called nirvisheshanam. One should not, however, misunderstand nirvisheshanam as being without any transcendental qualities. Visheshanam means qualities. Therefore, nir added to it means that he has no material qualities or variegatedness. Capital H. This nullifying expression is described in 4 transcendental qualifications, namely unmanifested, transcendental, eternal, and beyond the conception of mind or word. Beyond the limits of words means negation of the material conception. Unless one is transcendently situated, it's not possible to know the transcendental form of the Lord. Madhvacharya also talks about, he also indicates that this is a discussion of the transcendental form of the Lord. Bhagavatam verses have multiple meanings. 35. Amuni Bhagavad Rupe Maya te hyanuvaranite ubhe api na grihnanti Maya srishti vipaschitaha. Neither of the above forms of the Lord, as just described unto you from the material angle of vision, is accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord who know him well. Maya srishti jagati ye avipaschitaha. He reads Maya srishti avipaschitaha. In grammar, it's allowed. The foolish people, they do not they do not accept the 2 types of material creations in this world. Upasanaartham bhagavati aropitam rupadvayam apavadati. Now, he talks about an exception to what has been presented in general so far, so long. So long, the 2 forms of gross and subtle were superimposed on Bhagavan for the sake of meditation. Now, he points out, but there is a spiritual form which is separate from this. This is a statement of exception. Na grinanti vastuto na angi kurvanti. So in reality, they don't accept that the Supreme Lord has a gross body or a subtle body. Yataha Maya Srishti, because they are created by Maya. Taddevam Bhagavato Rupam Ityuktes Syapi Prakrititva Apatati Tan Nishedhya Tan Nishedhaya Ahamuniti. अमुनि अमो उपासनार्थं भगवती आरोपिते जगदात्मके स्थूल सूक्ष्माख्ये विराट हिरण्य गर्भ अपरपर्याये समष्टि शरीरे. So for the sake of meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead Bhagavan, the Virat, which is gross, and Hiranyagarbha, which is subtle, these two forms were superimposed on Bhagavan. Collectively, the intelligent souls do not accept them. Vastutaya na upasate. They factually do not engage in an upasana of these. They don't meditate on these. Kim tarhi tadiya bahiranga adhisthana tayaiva. Why meditate on his external location? And then he quotes from Vishnu Purana also. And then he quotes from Kena Upanishad, a famous statement. Nedam yadditum upasate. The Supreme Soul is not the one whom you are meditating upon here. And Ramanujacharya has also explained this. That here, you have all these living creatures in this world. And this is not that Supreme Brahman, Narayana. Atayeva na grinanti iti atra hetu. So they don't accept these two forms because Maya Srishti, Natu Swarupa Shakti Pradur Bhavite. These are not forms which are revealed by the Lord's personal potency. Anena Chaturbhujadi Lakshanasya Sakshad Rupasya Maya Atito Api Vyaktam. So it is evident from this verse that his own form, Sakshad Rupa, his own direct form, characterized as being four-armed and so on, is beyond Maya. Prapyatvena na svikurvanti. When it is said that the learned devotees do not accept, it means that they do not consider these to be their destinations. Kintu upasanartham prathamat dashayam eva. Rather, they are for the sake of meditation, which means in the initial stage alone. Tritiyam atisukshmam yattu tat karanam maya eva. The third very subtle form, that is the cause of the subtle and the gross forms, and that is Maya. Kimcha vipashitaha, the intelligent souls, Shuddha Bhaktivantaha, who are filled with pure bhakti to Bhagavan, Prathamadashayam api naiva grananti. Even in the first stage, they do not accept meditation of this gross and subtle forms of the Lord. Kintu Rama, Krishna, Narayana, Narasimhadi Rupam, Shuddha Sattvameva sadhana sadhya tashayor grananti. Rather, they accept both at the stage of sadhana and sadhya, the goal, the forms of pure goodness such as Ramachandra, Krishna Chandra, Narayana, Narasimha, and so on. Personalists think of the absolute personality of Godhead in two different ways, as above mentioned. On the one hand, they worship the Lord in his Vishwarupa, or all-pervading universal form. And on the other, they think of the Lord's unmanifested, indescribable, subtle form. The theories of pantheism and monism are respectively applicable to the two conceptions of the Supreme as gross and subtle, but both of them are rejected by the learned pure devotees of the Lord because they are aware of the factual position. This is very clearly mentioned in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which records Arjuna's experience of the Vishwarupa of the Supreme Lord Shri Krishna. Drishtapurvam rishitosmi drishtva bhayena cha pravyatitam mano me tadeva me darshaya rupam Tarshaya Deva Rupam Prasita Devesha Jagan Nivasa. This is Bhagavad Gita 11.45. Arjuna, as a pure devotee of the Lord, never previously saw the contemplated universal form of the Lord, Vishwarupa. But when he did see, his curiosity was satisfied. But because of his attachment as a pure devotee, he was not happy to see that form. Indeed, he was afraid to see such a gigantic form of the Lord. He therefore prayed to the Lord to assume his four-handed Narayana form or his Krishna form, which alone could please Arjuna. Undoubtedly, the Lord has a supreme potency to exhibit himself in multifarious forms. But the pure devotees of the Lord are interested in his forms as eternally exhibited in the abode of the Lord known as a Tripad Vibhuti or kingdom of God. The Lord in the Tripad Vibhuti uh, abode exhibits himself in two forms. Either with four hands or with two hands. The Vishwarupa exhibited in the material manifestation has unlimited hands and unlimited dimensions with everything unlimited. The pure devotees of the Lord worship him in his Vaikuntha forms as Narayana or Krishna. Sometimes the same Vaikuntha forms of the Lord are in the material world also by his grace as Sri Rama, Sri Krishna, Sri Narasimhadeva, etc. Thus the pure devotees also worship them. Usually the features shown in the material world have no existence in the Vaikuntha planets and thus they are not accepted by the pure devotees. What the pure devotees worship from the very beginning are the eternal forms of the Lord existing in the Vaikuntha planets. The non-devotee impersonalists imagine material forms of the Lord and ultimately they merge into the impersonal Brahmajyoti of the Lord, whereas the pure devotees of the Lord are worshippers of the Lord, both in the beginning and also in the perfect stage of salvation eternally. The worship of the pure devotee never stops, whereas the worship of the impersonalist stops after his attainment of salvation, when he merges into the impersonal form of the Lord known as the Brahmajyoti. Therefore, the pure devotees of the Lord are described here as Vipaschitaha, or the learned who are in knowledge of the Lord perfectly. Right, there's something in the chat box. What is all this? There is no question of liberation from the clutches of illusion, Maya, however much one may declare himself a liberated soul. Where is this from? Then why one should try to liberate? I don't know where is this from. Is there any need to pray to particular deity for respective problem of different organs? In Karma Kanda, they have all that. Is it necessary to think about one's diet, including proteins and vitamins, while following a brahmachari lifestyle? In the ashram, we have been taught to remain content with whatever food is provided. But nowadays, I hear that some devotees are experiencing deficiencies in vitamins and proteins. So this should be brought up to whoever is managing the ashram, that they have to provide foodstuffs that are sufficiently nutritious. How does the mind, being a smaller layer, overcome intelligence even when intelligence is trained? Because Maya Devi is behind. When Maya Devi empowers the mind, then the mind can become stronger than intelligence, not otherwise. I also heard that we have 7 layers of skin. Is that true? I do not know. I have not studied Ayurveda. These are all Ayurvedic topics. Somebody who you can consult someone learned in Ayurveda. Achyutanam Prabhu has some question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, in this 30th verse, when mind was manifested, and then there was mention about of determination also. So, if my determination is weak, is it because of weak mind?
There is some relationship, definitely. There is definitely some relationship. In fact, Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about Hridaya Daurbalya as one of the uh, problems, obstacles in spiritual progress, one of the anarthas. And that actually, the way he explains it, it refers to a weak determination. And Hridaya means the mind in this context. Hridaya Daurbalya means weakness of heart, which means weakness of mind. So something is there. There's definitely something. Okay, let's look at one more verse. 36. Savacha Vachakataya Bhagavan Brahmarupa Dhrik Namarupa Kriyadhatte Sakarma Karma Paraha. He, the personality of Godhead, manifests himself in a transcendental form, being the subject of his transcendental name, qualities, pastimes, entourage, and transcendental variegatedness. Although he is unaffected by all such activities, he appears to be so engaged. Yes, you have another question?
Prabhu, is there also a solution provided for it? This Hridaya Dvaravanya moving determination.
All of the anarthas have to be gotten rid of by the devotee by associating with those who do not possess these anarthas and by being trained by them in Krishna Bhakti. That is the general solution that is given. Okay, in the chat box, text 24. There is no question of liberation from the clutches of illusion, Maya, however much one may declare himself a liberated soul. Wow, this must be, wait, where is text 24? 2.10.2.24.
At the end, Prabhu, end of the purport.
There's no question of liberation from the clutches of illusion, Maya, however much one may declare himself a conditioned soul. Unless one surrenders to the Lord, there's no question. Even though he thinks of himself as a liberated soul, he will not be liberated. He has to surrender unto the Lord. Okay. यद्रूपगुणकर्मकः इति यदुक्तं भगवता ब्रह्माणं प्रति तत्प्रपञ्चयितं ब्रह्मादिरूपाणि तत्कर्माणि च आह स इत्यादिना इत्थं भावेन इति अतः प्राक्तनेन ग्रन्थेन. So now he begins to talk about the different forms that the Lord said that he would be that he referred to in 2.9.30 when he was talking to Brahma. So the Supreme Lord, he manifests himself in the form of Brahma and the others. It is not clear to me whether he's referring to Brahma or whether he's referring to Brahman. Could refer to both. But it seems to be Brahma because he's saying that in order to elaborate on 2.9.30 on that particular point, the current verse talks about the forms of Brahma, which can refer to Chaturmukha Brahma or Brahma, and the various activities of those forms. Now, Brahman does not engage in any form, so it appears like that. That Bhagavan, assuming a Brahma Rupa, he produces names, forms, and activities. And thus, he is present as Vachi and Vachaka. Vachaka means a reference, and Vachya means the object of reference. So this refers to particular names with which you refer to particular forms within material existence. Maya sakarma sa vyaparasan vasutastu akarmaka. So within the field of Maya, he becomes active, even though factually he is not active. अतः एतत् सम्बन्धि सर्वमपि भगवद्रूपत्वेनैव कल्पितम्. Therefore, everything is considered as a form of Bhagavan. यद रूप गुणकर्मक इति अत्र तु अप्राकृतानि चतुश्लोक्यां श्री भगवता प्रतिज्ञातानि स्वयमेव दर्शितानि व्याख्यातमेव. The transcendental forms referred to in Chatushloki, they were showed by the Lord Sri Bhagavan to Brahma. They were also explained at that time itself. So Mahadadi Srashta Purusha. Here, he, the personality of God, refers to that Purusha who creates Mahatattva and so on. Paraha refers to, or transcendence refers to Parameshwara, the Supreme Lord. Akarmakaha, Prakrita Kriya Hinopi, Brahmarupa Drik San, Sakarma, Savyapara. He assumes the form of Brahma. It's actually Brahma only. Even though the Lord is personally devoid of material activities, he becomes active here. Vakshamananam Vyashtijivanam Dhatte Srijati. In that way, he creates all the jivas, the collection of all the jivas. Whenever there's a need of material creation, the transcendental personality of Godhead accepts forms in the material world for creation, maintenance, and destruction. One should be intelligent enough to know his activities in truth and not be biased to conclude that he descends to the material world by accepting a form created by material nature. Any form accepted from the material nature will be affected by everything done in the material world. A conditioned soul who accepts a material form for undergoing a certain term of material activities is subjected to the laws of matter. But here in this verse, it is clearly stated that although the forms and activities of the Lord appear to be the same as those of a conditioned soul, they are supernatural and impossible for the conditioned soul. He, the Supreme Personality of God, is always unaffected by such activities. In the Bhagavad Gita 4.14, the Lord says, Namam karmani limpanti, name karma phales praha, iti mam yogi janati, karma bhir nasabadhyate. The Lord is never affected by the activities which he apparently performs by his different incarnations and personalities, nor does he have any desire to achieve success by fruitive activities. The Lord is full by his different potencies of wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, and thus he has no reason for physical exertion like the conditioned soul. Therefore, an intelligent person who can distinguish between the transcendental activities of the Lord and the activities of the conditioned souls is also not bound by the reactions of activities. The Lord, as Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, conducts the three modes of material nature. From Vishnu is born Brahma, and from Brahma is born Shiva. Sometimes Brahma is a separated part of Vishnu, and sometimes Brahma is Vishnu himself. Thus, Brahma creates the different species of life all over the universe, which means that the Lord creates the whole manifestation either by himself or through the agency of his authorized deputies. Does the Vatsarik ceremony help the living entity? What is it? I don't even know what is the Vatsarik ceremony. Is it recommended? I have no idea. I heard that after 7 months, one changes one's body. 7 months.
Varsarik means that annual after one dies, so the death anniversary they say.
Shraddha. These are all Shraddha ceremonies. In Karma Kanda, these things are done to benefit the souls who die. Pious souls, actually, they're meant to be pious souls. At least some piety they should have done.
So even if he is in another body, he will get the benefits, bro.
He'll get the benefit. He'll get the benefit. He'll get some benefit. It's transferred to his account. Some pious credits will be transferred to his account. Okay, we should stop now. Vanchakalpatarubhyasya kripasantabhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo.